Next is right to stoppage in transit. Now, the right to stoppage in transit means, the seller has given the goods to the carrier, and while the goods are in transit, they are being taken to the buyer. In the midway, the seller calls up the carrier or the transporter and tells him not to deliver the goods. The goods are stopped in transit and they are asked to come back. So, in this case, the seller regains the right over the goods, regains the possession of the goods. In case of right of lien, he retained the possession. In case of stoppage in transit, he regains the possession. Now, this right to stoppage in transit is available after the right to lien gets over. Now, it is easy to understand. Right to lien is available till the time the goods are in the possession of the seller. Once the seller gives the goods to the carrier, he parts with the possession. So there the right to lien gets over, and then what starts is the right to stoppage in transit. So where the right to lien gets over, right to stoppage in transit starts. Okay. Only when the buyer is insolvent and the goods are in transit. The buyer becomes insolvent there and the goods are still in transit. Otherwise, the seller cannot stop the carrier. He cannot just stop the carrier and tell him that bring the goods back. The important condition is the goods are still in transit, agreed, but the buyer has to get insolvent. Okay. Here the carrier is the independent person. He is not a person of the seller, or he is not a person, an agent of the buyer. He is an independent person. Now let us distinguish between right to lien and right to stoppage in transit. First, the purpose here is to retain possession and here is to regain. Now these are very confusing words, retain and regain. What is the exact meaning and how do we use it in our daily parlance? I'll give you an example for this. India won the World Cup in 1983. It was the first time India won the World Cup. Before that, West Indies had won it. West Indies won it in 75. Then they again won it in 79. And later on in 83, India went to win it. So in 79, when West Indies again won the World Cup, we can say that they retained the World Cup, because in 75 they won the World Cup, so the World Cup was with them. They had the possession of the World Cup. In 79 they again won it. That means the World Cup did not go to any other country. They retained the possession. The possession was with them only. However, in 83 India won the World Cup. So they had to part with the World Cup. And in 87 Australia won the World Cup. So India could not retain the World Cup. You're getting my point? India could not continue with the possession of the World Cup. But in 2011 India again won the World Cup. And this time we can say that India regained the World Cup. It again got the possession. India parted with the possession in 87 and got it back again in 2011. Australia had won it in 2007, but it could not retain. So India regained the possession, and in 2015 again the Australia regained the possession. Regaining happens after parting with the possession, and retaining means continuous possession. To retain means to continue with possession and regain you part with possession and again get it back. You part with the possession and again get it back. So this is the difference. So in right to lien, you continue with the possession. You do not make the delivery. You do not give it to the buyer. Whereas in regain, you have parted with the possession. The possession was with you. Now you have given it to the carrier, and then you ask him to stop and come back, and then you again get the possession. So this is the difference between retaining and regaining. The next is possession. When right to lien is exercised, seller is in the possession of the goods. But when right to stoppage in transit is exercised, the carrier is in possession of the goods. This is very simple to understand. Next, when does it start and when does it end? The right to lien is always with the seller, but it ends when the right to stoppage in transit starts. And a right to stoppage starts when right to lien ends. Okay. Now, what is the rule for both these rights? There's only one rule which says unpaid seller's right of lien or stoppage in transit is not affected by any sale or pledge by the buyer. If the buyer does some further sale, he resells the goods or he keeps the goods in pledge, it does not affect the right to lien or stoppage because he has only transferred the ownership. The possession is with the seller in case of right of lien, or it is with the carrier in case of right of stoppage in transit. So he has not got the possession yet. So even if he resells the goods or keeps them as a pledge, it does not affect the seller's right to lien or stoppage in transit. However, like all rules have some exception in law, this rule also has. So what are the exceptions? First, done with the consent of the seller, where the seller allows the buyer to sell the goods or allows him to keep the goods for pledge. We've already studied this point. When the seller, with his consent, if the buyer sells the goods to third parties, he loses the right to lien. Same is the case with right to stoppage in transit. Next, sale by document to title. Again, we studied this point. The seller loses the right to lien over the goods if documents of title to the goods are given to someone by the buyer in good faith and for value, of course.